Hey, thanks for tuning in, everybody. I've been inundated with requests to get Kevin back on. We had him on a week or so ago. It is storming up to about 100,000 views in a week. Kevin, absolutely, raising people's awareness of what is going on behind the scenes in the Vatican, because they're putting on this front. Pope Francis, he lives modestly. He's against investing in arms companies, etc. While behind the scenes, there's all kinds of diabolical things. And also, we have got the conclave right now. I don't understand what that means. Perhaps Kevin can elaborate. What? Thanks for coming back, my friend. And what is all this conclave business about?
Well, they don't call it a conclave for nothing. It's a show. But before I answer that, I just wanted to remind folks that since our last interview, we've sold over 300 copies of this online, which is phenomenal. And it's thanks to the show and people's interest. So thank you, everyone. It's got all the facts you need to take on this beast in Rome. Conclave, it actually comes from an Indo-European word several thousand years old. And it originally meant a hook or a branch in a road, which is kind of a strange idea. But the deeper meaning is it's a secret place where you meet to make decisions that nobody can know about. Now, why they would call the choosing of the Bishop of Rome a secret nobody can know about is an interesting clue, because in fact, the guy who is the figurehead is chosen long before the conclave. The conclave is 130 cardinals getting together in the Sistine Chapel. Remember where Leonardo da Vinci painted or Michelangelo rather, painted the Sistine ceiling and all that. They meet in there and they put on this little show that they're choosing the Pope, right? In fact, a guy called Pietro Perilin's already been chosen. He's the serving Secretary of State. He's the power in Rome. He's the one who's been pushing to ally openly with China. And he's been gathering all the financial resources together for many years. To as we talked about last time, the power financially and politically shifting east to China, and he's a big force in doing that. So he's already running the show. He'll continue to. Whoever they choose as the public pope is just a figurehead designed to distract people, and so in a way, it's kind of irrelevant who they choose, right?
So all of Kevin's links are in the description box, folks, if you're watching this on YouTube. Let's go over this more slowly then, because here it's reporting there's all kinds of various contenders for the new position. And you're saying it's already been decided?
Yeah. Do you remember last time when they picked Bergoglio, Francis, after the whole Ratzinger scandal, after we forced him out of office, and all that stuff was coming out about the Ninth Circle cult and the child trafficking coming right out of the Vatican? Bergoglio needed to be the facelift. He brought, the smiley Frank, we call him, named after St. Francis of Assisi, of course. The beneficent smiling guy, to distract everybody, to think papal reform was happening. In fact, everything he did set back the clock even more to any kind of change or reform. But he was in 2 days. I don't know if you remember that. 48 hours later, he's in. There wasn't even a conclave. He was appointed, which everyone thought was strange because he's a Jesuit, and no Jesuit is allowed to be pope. So anyway, there's all that suspension of reason that has to go on. But similarly now, it'll probably drag on a number of days. They could choose a black or an Asian as as the Bishop of Rome. That would make sense in terms of a public relations point of view, to make it look like, if there's a Negro Pope, that people just look at him and say, oh, things must be changing, So it's all smoke and mirrors. But the reality is they need Pietro Perilin and even more. Don't forget, he's the guy who came with Bergoglio to Canada in 2022, met with the Chinese, and signed that agreement whereby the Vatican Bank would underwrite a lot of the Chinese takeover of North America, the economy and all that. So he's essential. He runs the College of Cardinals, and he's kind of seen as a diplomat. He's always the one seen in pictures with politicians and that. So, you follow the money and the power, and that and it leads to him.
Yeah, I'm just going to get a picture of him up. And
he's my age. Actually, he's a year younger than me.
Yeah, that's right. There it is. Let me get this one. So could you just expand a bit more on his backstory then? Do you know about his ascension within the Vatican?
He's from the old Italian mob. You know, he was an Italian bishop. He went from being a priest to a bishop very quickly in his 20s, which is unusual. And he situated himself early on to be at the center of the political and diplomatic stuff going on with other countries and that. And what was interesting was, if you remember when we forced Ratzinger out of office, one of the ways it happened was we went to the Spanish government, which had this power to investigate human rights abuses anywhere in the world. They had universal jurisdiction on cases involving genocide. So we went to them. We showed them all our docket of evidence on Bergoglio or on Ratzinger. And they're the ones who wrote to Ratzinger and said he might face arrest when he comes to Spain. 6 days later, he resigns as Pope Benedict. Well, this guy here, Perilin, helped broker that. And in fact, Perilin was working with the Spanish ambassador, a guy called Eduardo de Verruga, to get Bergoglio in. So it was, you know, a power struggle, but it shows the kind of power the guy has, that he was able to arrange that with the Spanish government. And at the same time, he was directing a lot of the work of the Vatican towards China. He made the arrangement with China whereby the government gets to run the church in China, if you can believe it. It's the only country in the world where the government has a body that directs what the Catholic Church should be doing, right? Nowhere else in the world does that happen. The government gets to appoint Catholic bishops and cardinals. So it's kind of like a joint Vatican-Chinese operation going on when it comes to the Catholic Church in China, right? And, you know, so it shows you the guy's political power. Also, do you remember when Bergoglio talked about reforming Vatican finances? Well, that was the cover to start grabbing the wealth of all these independent societies within the church. Like, for example, the Knights of Malta, who are descended from the Knights Templar. You know about the Templars, who were wiped out in the 1300s by the church because they were getting too wealthy. They were a crusading society, a military society, but they opened the first banks in Europe. And so the Vatican decided one day to wipe them out with the help of the King of France. And you know the massacre of all the Knights of Malta, or rather the Knights Templar leaders, who were burned at the stake outside Notre Dame in Paris and that. Well, the same thing is going on with their descendant. The Knights of Malta were dissolved by this guy, Pietro Perilin. It was back in 2017. They wanted to get the wealth. You see, the Knights of Malta had their own independent investments going on all over, like Citibank in America, along with the Jesuits. They were running it. They wanted to consolidate all the finances in order to channel it to Beijing in that direction, into what they call it the BRICS alliance. Most of the economic growth in the world now is happening in the East, in the Indo-Pacific region. That's the economic powerhouse in the world today. So naturally, the biggest financial power in the world, the Vatican Bank, is going there too. But they need the wealth of all these different societies. And on that grounds, they dissolved the Knights of Malta, took over their finances. And again, he's the guy who arranged it. So, I mean, you know, as if they would not put him in, right? That's really the point, right?
So when it comes to these priests getting caught abusing kids, what's his attitude towards that?
He follows the party line in the Vatican, as did every other pope. They have to. It's the policy is enunciated in a thing called crimen solicitatis. It's a Latin word meaning the crime of solicitation. And it's reprinted at the back of our book, murderbydecree.com. Just go to one of the appendices and you'll see it. It was brought in 1929 with the help of the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, who set up the Vatican Bank. And it said whenever any child is raped by a priest or harmed in any way, no one is to be told. The police are not to be told. That's a criminal conspiracy right there to protect child rapists. And anyone who does is excommunicated. Okay. So in other words, you protect the rapist and silence anyone who wants to tell about it, right? Any honest priest or Catholic gets tossed out of the church if they try to defend children. He's a longstanding supporter of that policy. As a matter of fact, he was, when Bergoglio was waffling a bit and making it seem like he might have questions about that policy, for again, public relations reasons, to make his image look better, This guy came out and denied Bergoglio's remark and reaffirmed the policy of the College of Cardinals, which is that the church washes its own dirty laundry. They have their own, you see, the Vatican has in every country their own legal system set up, ignores the laws of your own country. Priests, as we know from the residential school genocide we proved in Canada, priests can go and kill anyone they want, and they can then get tried in ecclesiastical courts, not the courts of the land. So they're a power unto themselves. They're the most dangerous society in the world because they're answerable to no one but themselves. And they've got billions and billions of dollars of money to buy off any politician or judge they want. So, I mean, this is the degree of the threat posed by this kind of guy, right?
So how can they reconcile that with supposedly upholding moral values for society if these brutal things are being done to kids? And they're not enabling the priests that are the pedophiles to suffer the consequences. They're just furthering even more victims.
They don't believe there's anything wrong with raping a child. That's the first thing to understand. In Vatican doctrine, and they've said this time and again, the raping of a child is not a crime, it's a sin. And a sin can be forgiven, right? In the first trial in America, it actually summoned, besides the priests who were involved in Philadelphia in massive child trafficking network there in the Catholic Church, the William Lane, he was a Monsignor in Philadelphia, and he made the statement when he was in the court in Philadelphia on trial for aiding and abetting these trafficking of children. He said, we didn't think it was a crime to traffic children. I mean, you see, don't forget, they're operating out of a mindset of children are born evil, original sin. The only crime is to challenge the authority and the wealth and the position of the church. That's a crime. And, you know, it isn't just the Catholic Church. Every church operates according to that. I was told that when I was thrown out of the United Church for exposing these crimes. The guy, Brian Thorpe, the official on the West Coast of the United Church who arranged my firing without cause when I brought out these crimes against children, he said, we know all about those things, Kevin. The only problem is you wrote a letter about it. And that summarizes the religious mentality. We are the source of all morality. We get to define morality. And if you go against it, that's the real crime. If you challenge us, that's the crime. Everything else is forgivable. And so, you know, you have to understand who you're dealing with. And it's on morality and what we understand it as the life of a child is not sacred at all, despite all the rhetoric. You know, I mean, of course they have to put the rhetoric out there to keep everyone in the pews and putting money into the collection plate. But in practice, you know, like Jesus said, by their works you will know them, not by their words, right?
It should be called the Church of Satan, not the Vatican, from what they're enabling. All right, folks, so we've got Kevin with us, and if you've got any questions, put them in the chat. All of his links, including his book, etc., are in the description box. And the question that is coming in, the first question that's come in, is: do you think all the popes, the history of the popes, they've all been bad people?
Well, absolutely. Because now, when the Vatican was the Catholic Church set up officially in the year 317, the early popes weren't really popes. There were three bishops. One in Alexandria, one in Constantinople, one in Rome. Okay, three different bishops. None of them claimed ultimate supremacy. So if you go in the first few hundred years of the Catholic Church, the Bishop of Rome is just another guy, and he doesn't claim supremacy and authority, and he's the voice of Christ. None of that. But then, as with the so-called Dark Ages, the Roman Church realized, hey, here's our chance to take over from the Roman Empire. We can be the authority. We can get the whole ball of wax. That's when you began to get talk like, we are the link between heaven and earth. You know, the Pope is Christ on earth. All that garbage began to come in after that. It became a political power. It took over from the Roman Empire. So since then, yes, every single Bishop of Rome considers himself God, Christ on earth. And in my book, I go into that. I have quotes from popes right down the centuries, all saying, we are Christ on earth. The magisterium, that is the authority of the College of Cardinals, is God. And you have to worship us and come to us for salvation. And don't forget, I've got a list of all the papal bulls over the centuries. And in 1302, and I love that word bull, right? It meant, because it is a lot of bull, but bulla, Latin word meaning a stamp. So it means, you know, so-called law or statute passed by the Vatican. 1302, Pope Boniface VIII says, extra ecclesiam sola nulla salus, which in Latin means outside the church, there is no salvation. Okay, you're either part of the Catholic Church or you're damned. And if you're damned, we can take your land, we can murder your children, we can work them as slave labor. That's why Pope Francis, the big liberal, applauded Junipero Serra, the Franciscan missionary who worked to death 100,000 natives in California. He said, we're inspired by his zeal because he killed all those unbelievers. See, even liberals in the Catholic Church believe that garbage, that if you're not a Catholic, you don't have the right to exist. And that's what plays out in practice all the time. It's all in murderbydecree.com and all my books. It's all the proof is there, but who wants to really look at that, right? You know, you might upset your Catholic neighbor, right? You might get sued by the local church. I mean, you know, that's the reality of what we're dealing with, right?
So, Amy, there is a cardinal from Liverpool. Is there a chance of a British Pope? He supports Liverpool Football Club and hails from the same village I was brought up in.
No, I don't. I mean, why would they? Here's the point, though. Why would they even want one of your guys in as the head of this criminal syndicate? I mean, it's like asking, you know, it's very comparable to the Mafia. Even there, you know, you saw in Mafia movies, the law of omerta, the law of silence. No one is to talk. That's what the criminal policy is. God doesn't like a snitch. You're going to get thrown into hell if you report a child rapist, you know. So there's one law for everyone within their little cult and one law for everybody else. And that's never changed. And it isn't going to change because every cardinal, every pope is sworn to uphold the secrets of the church, including things like the Ninth Circle, where they're expected to participate in its rituals. And I've got more on that, actually. I can talk about one of the cardinals from Quebec, Gerard Lacroix, who we caught. We actually shut down a Ninth Circle ceremony in Montreal in 2014 with the help of local police, one of whom was then killed for it. But as part of that, we found a lot of dirt going on in Canada with these cardinals, which we can get into if you like. But.
Yes, please elaborate.
Well, in a nutshell, the Harper government, which actually did the so-called apology about the residential schools, one of his Stephen Harper's one of his cabinet minister was Denis Lebel, and he was personal friends with this Gerald Lacroix. Lacroix. Now he's one of the top candidates for the papacy, one of the figureheads they're going to put out there to maybe elect. Lacroix is a longtime member of the Ninth Circle in Canada. We found early on in our investigations in the Indian schools in Canada that there were cult ceremonies going on using the children, and this guy was part of it, especially in Quebec, where the Catholic Church has total authority. And this cabinet minister, Denis Lebel, was interestingly linked to Cargill Corporation. It's one of the big food and processing companies in the world, whose CEO and other officers were actually caught in child raping ceremonies. And, there's that corporate link, but he was a good friend of Gerald Lacroix. And when we stopped the ceremony under, took place at the main cathedral in Montreal, Marie Rendemont Cathedral in the sub-basement area. Lacroix was there, but the police went in, and along with some of our common law court sheriffs, began to film it, and then his assistants pulled out their guns, and Gerald went out the back door with his armed buddies, like for that contingency, right? And the guy who took part in that, an Ottawa police detective, his name was Kel Gadban, an East Indian man, and he was a decorated police officer. His specialty was human trafficking. He worked with our people. The next week, he's found dead in the police station in Ottawa of a suicide, even though he had no history of depression, happy family man with 3 children. So they cleaned house. They got rid of, and they struck back. But the point is, this Gerald Lacroix is dirty, even by Vatican standards, very dirty. And yet he is politically tied into the whole regime in Canada, the Canadian government. And the thing about Canada is that it has such a long history of these crimes against children and indigenous people, because it's got the nice image. Canadians are nice. It's a vast territory where these things can be hidden, and it's economically crucial to the growing Chinese empire, bankrolled by the Vatican Bank. So, there's a chance that Gerald could end up with the papal hat, or somebody equally likable to China. But the point is, this is what we're dealing with when you're talking about these cardinals, right?
All right. So the next question that has come in is, let's see. Fred wants to know, is it true you need to pay the church to pass through purgatory?
If you believe in purgatory in the first place, papal indulgences, this whole sordid history, right? Originally, an indulgence was do you remember the Crusades? So how do you get people to go and fight and kill strangers? Well, you need a religion. So they were told, anyone who went off to the crusade says that if you die in the service of the church, all of your sins are automatically erased and you go right to heaven. Like Muslim jihad warriors are told the same thing, right? But in this case, an indulgence became, if you pay enough money to the church. I mean, this is what sparked the Reformation, because Martin Luther said, hold on. He went to Rome as a monk, and he found that you had to pay a certain amount of money, because all of a sudden, all of the souls of your ancestors are in hell. They made up this thing called purgatory. Why? Because the Vatican was bankrupt. It was building all these big cathedrals, and they were in debt to a Dutch banking family called the Fuggers, which I think was kind of an appropriate term, name for a family. But Fuggers owned the debt to the Vatican, and they needed to raise a lot of money quick. And they admitted to this. Historians talk about this openly. So they created the indulgence. Everybody has to buy their ancestors' soul out of heaven. Yeah, I mean, isn't that obvious? You've got to pay God to get, God isn't a loving beneficent. He needs cash, just like the church does. Anyone stupid enough to believe this, and of course, there's still a lot of people who do that. They think that, and I saw it for myself the one time I went to the Vatican Museum. I had a billboard, and it said, "Papal indulgence, 150 euros." So, a special prayer from the top criminal means that and whoever you want, their soul is sprung from purgatory, which doesn't even exist, but it still goes on. These deluded millions of people are feeding the biggest financial octopus in the world. Vatican Bank has about 3/4 of all the world's assets, bank assets, deposits, and fed by all these people who believe in purgatory. So, I mean, yeah, sure, they believe you can buy your way into heaven. That's why.
And this ties in, I think, it's what we previously spoke about, the Catholic care homes, where they're getting these old people to sign over their properties to buy the place in heaven.
Yeah, it's the biggest con job in history, and people fall for it because when you're in a state of fear and dependency, as we've all been raised throughout our life, we think somebody else has the answer for us, and we have to rely on these people, especially when they're getting subsidized by the state, and the whole media loves them, and the New York Times talks about who's going to be the next pope. It's all a big racket. It's like living in El Capone, Chicago, and there's no difference really.
All right. Is it true the Catholic Church is in bad shape now, but it will be purified by God and she will rise again in glory? Prophecy says Rome will be destroyed. Please research Catholic prophecy. That's from Siobhan.
Yeah, well, McNamee. That was actually the name of my ex-wife, Anne McNamee. Hi. But no, I don't believe in any of that. And the point is, I guess you could say that it would take an act of God to purify something as satanic as the Church of Rome. But it doesn't have to be purified, because that, just go to Scripture and it says the kingdom of heaven is within you. Christ said, my kingdom is not of this world. The Church of Rome has nothing to do with Jesus Christ. It has to do with the system set up by the empire, the Roman Empire. And, we have to get out of that thing we've all been brainwashed into since birth, right? Especially people in the church.
Right. Okay. Next question is, let me see 1 second. Let's go over here. Where are we? We've got loads of questions come in. Amy wants to know, does Kevin agree with the concept of the papacy?
Well, I guess that's obvious that I don't have to repeat everything.
Okay. Next one is from Sihan. So, why do mainstream Christians of all denomination call Gnostics evil, whilst others claim that they are the true followers of Christ? This has been twisted since the start.
Yeah. Well, a Gnostic, it comes from the word gnosis in Greek, which means knowledge. And it was a wing of the early, I don't want to call it Christianity because it wasn't called Christianity in the first 2 to 3 centuries. You don't even see the appearance of the cross until about 250 AD in archaeological ruins. Okay. So the early Jesus followers, one branch in near Syria, were these Gnostics, and they believed that Jesus didn't come with talking about sin and salvation, but about enlightenment and ignorance. And gnosis acquiring a certain special, Jesus had a secret wisdom that he passed on to a few disciples, 3 actually, Mary, John, and Andrew, I believe, unless I got that wrong. And they were an inner circle. And in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which I tried reading in the church on Sundays, and people got very upset, because it wasn't in the accepted canon of the Bible. But in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, she talks about the secret knowledge that Jesus passed on. And it has nothing to do with damnation, and it's a totally different mindset. Now, naturally, if you're the Church of Rome and you're based on fear and control of people, the last thing you want to have is a group of people who are saying, you don't need the church, it's all within us, it's a matter of achieving that inner enlightenment. It was influenced by Persian and Indian and other influences from the East, but the point is that's why they were all massacred. That's why the Cathars were massacred, and my Protestant ancestors were gone after, because we stood outside the control, the mental and spiritual, political control of the Church of Rome, and that's always a threat to them. So that's why they were taken out.
So, next question. Is it the case that Catholicism started when the Roman government adopted their own version of Christianity after the resurrection of Christ proved they killed the Messiah and Rome had to appease the people?
No, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Because here's the thing. When what you're taught in school or in the church is a fabrication. It's not based on anything really in history. It's not even based on anything in scripture or the early church. It comes out of the political and economic needs of the church. And if you want to, the thing about these conversations is that they can get very abstract. And like I said, by their works, you know them. I mean, we're talking about not only the massacre of generations of people who are Catholics. And if I go into the details of how these children are ritually killed, and newborn babies thrown into ovens by Catholic priests because they raped a native girl and they had to get rid of the evidence. Eyewitnesses talking about these horrendous crimes. How can anyone not only be part of that, but fund it, or even have a sense that it has anything to do with Jesus Christ and humanity? It doesn't. So, I mean, I always like to root these conversations in reality and real people, and not ideas that kind of float out of nowhere that serve somebody else's interest, right? If you know what I'm saying here.
Thanks for all the questions, folks. Keep them coming in. And all of the links for Kevin are in the description box. Fred wants to know, does the church teach that our souls remain in the grave until the rapture?
Well, I think one branch of Christianity believes that. That's why they don't believe in cremating people. But again, I mean, who knows? Like I used to say to people in church, I mean, physicists tell us that 80% of the universe is unobservable, and it's the same within ourselves. How can we know? How can anyone know? None of us know. I used to say to people, if you talk about God talk in church, and that is hearsay. It's rumor mongering. It's like we don't ultimately know. So why do we have to kill each other so much over so many generations and attack and over issues that we can't even prove in any way, right? You may have an inner certainty, that's fine, but don't impose it on somebody else and kill them if they don't agree with you. I mean, if we didn't have religion, the world would be a lot more peaceful, frankly.
But wouldn't they find something else to be tribalistic over if there was no religion?
Probably, knowing people. But the thing is about religion, Sean, is that it allows you to kill without without any conscience. That's the point. You can defer moral responsibility onto God, right? God wants me to do this, right? And I'll be sanctified, like in the Indulgence or Holy War. I'm sanctified by killing. In fact, what's interesting, the Hebrew word Kiddush, which means a sacred sacrifice, it also means to purify. So the idea we get from Judeo-Christianity for thousands of years is, for you to be purified, somebody has to die for it. Whether it's, the Canaanite cult where they'd throw their newborn into the fire god Moloch and sacrifice them, that hasn't ever really changed. That idea that whatever is innocent and pure has to be sacrificed so that we can all survive. That's the purpose of a scapegoat. I experienced that personally. When I was thrown on, my life was destroyed, and the people doing it felt fine about it because, we can't cause division in the church. That one guy has to be sacrificed. Well, I'm not trying to compare myself in any way to Jesus Christ, but that's exactly what Christians and people, that's how they see Christ. He's up there nailed to the cross, suffering for us, right? God gave his only son. God tortured to death his only son. What does that tell you? Why do you think there's cults of child sacrifice in the church? It's based on that sick idea, right?
And you're talking about the owl, and you're getting asked for your thoughts on Bohemian Grove.
It's all part of, like, all of the above, right? It's all that same. Yeah, it's really weird because these things don't change over thousands of years. They just take different labels. And, again, you have to experience something directly. The old saying in the art of war, you don't know something until you fight it. We can have all sorts of fanciful ideas, but it's only when you confront a thing and it's trying to destroy your life, then you know what you're dealing with. And that's why these books I've written are not based on, surmising or my own private theory. It's based on hard evidence, hard experience of people. And I think that's why they're loved and hated all at the same time, because do we really want to deal with the evil in our own neighborhood, in our own backyard? You can talk about the Palestinians and Gaza all you want, but in your own backyard, will you take on child trafficking and killing? And I do want to mention that before the end of the show about how we're doing that now and the consequences of this latest papal, farce.
Fred wants to know, what is the actual unpardonable sin?
To who? You mean to the church? The Catholic Church believes the unpardonable sin is to challenge the authority of the papacy. And in the Bible, it says the unpardonable sin is to offend the Holy Spirit. But, take your pick.
All right. So Bailey has put, according to papal scriptures, is this not the last pope?
What the only scripture is that I know of is the Bible and the various earlier versions, or the papacy doesn't have a scripture. If you mean papal statutes or papal laws, no. So I'm not sure what he's referring to by papal scripture.
So Monica, if you could elaborate, expand on that question, please, viewer. Monica wants to know, have you ever been to Poland? Are your books translated for a very Catholic audience? Are you trying to educate ignorant Catholics? Asking seriously.
Oh, yeah. We, from early on in our campaign, almost 30 years now, we aimed not only at the Catholic audience, but the Anglicans, the United Church, any of the churches that would be involved in these crimes of genocide. We reach people in the pews all the time and try to reach them. But the problem is you're only reaching a minority, because especially within the Church of Rome, the level of intimidation and brainwashing is extreme, and people are afraid. There is a liberal Catholic element, let's say in a place like America, where 90% of Catholics ignore papal statutes on birth control, for example. There's kind of, and in the Catholic Church in Ireland, a whole group of priests is split off and separated from Rome. You see those currents all over. So yeah, I've worked with Catholic priests who've left the church and have their own congregations now. They've kept some of the cheat sheets, and it's kind of like, life is like that. It evolves, right? And but corporate institutions, and don't forget the Church of Rome was the first corporation in history. Corpus means corpse, a dead body, and people are to surrender their life to this dead body, and it feeds off us. It's energetically vampiric. Religio means to tie people together, not spiritu, which is breath of life, right? And so, yes, we've translated our books into 6 languages now. I think some of our works, not whole books, but articles and films and that we have had done in Polish. And if you do know people who want to help us, absolutely. It's got to be people in the church who say, look, bottom line, you're in a church that has a policy protecting child rapists. If you put money in the collection plate, you're aiding and abetting a criminal, what's called a transnational criminal organization. That's what we talk about in here. We prove how the Vatican, Church of Rome, launders money for the Mafia, traffics in arms and human beings, has centuries of blood on its hands. You can't fund that under international law or the law of your country, or you're aiding a crime. And you have nothing to complain about when your neighbor's child gets raped next. So stop funding it, get out of the church, do your own faith thing, but do it on your own. Don't rely on this corporate institution. So if you want to help with that, our email, angelfire101@protonmail.com. Just write me and see all our websites, which Sean has posted.
All in the description box, folks. All right. So does Kevin still believe in God and Jesus, but just not the Catholic Church? That's from Ian.
Well, I never believed in the Catholic Church because my ancestors, we've been getting attacked by the Vatican since my Huguenot ancestors fled to England in the 1500s. But of course I believe in God and Jesus. That's one of the things that sustained me, that spiritual relationship. I've never believed in the church of any variety because it's a human institution and it was never prescribed. Jesus never talked about a church. The word he used in the Bible when he said, "This is Peter, and on my rock I will build his church." The thing that got William Tyndale burned at the stake when he translated the Bible into English was he translated that word ecclesia as meaning congregation, not church, not corporate hierarchy, but the people gathered in their own communities in direct relationship with God and Christ. That's always been my model for Christian witness. And I don't call myself a Christian. There's no need to go by these labels. It's what you do every day, what's within you that matters. So yeah, that's an answer to that.
All right. Let me get the next question up. And thank you for all the questions coming in. This one ties into that one. Missy, are you an atheist agnostic?
Sometimes I go back and forth. I mean, like who knows ultimately? Like I have that faith relationship. I always felt Jesus was my brother. We were going through a lot together, that spirit, and how I saw him manifest in all sorts of people who had nothing, who were fighting for what was right. Some days I'm agnostic. Some days, who knows? It's a big question mark for me. Ultimately, I just go on what I've experienced and what seems to be logical.
All right. Next question is,
who are the guys in robes? Let me think. Is that Opus?
That's a question for you, isn't it? Can you identify them?
Well, it could be any of the various cults. It could be the Inquisition used to wear things like that.
So they're publicly identifying themselves as the hooded penitents of Italy.
Well, maybe one of the popes is in there under the hood because they've got a lot to be penitent about.
Sian, do you have a recommendation for a reliable book on the real teachings of Christ? There is a plethora of AI-generated nonsense to confuse people.
Seriously, I think that's a relationship you have. It's an inner relationship, and there's nothing you can learn externally. It might give you some clues and some directions to explore, but ultimately it's an inner relationship that I think the best description, the thing I always use is the Geneva Bible, which is it's the William Tyndale Bible translated in the 1500s, which translated the Old Testament directly from the Hebrew and the New Testament directly from the Greek. And it has a lot of the more genuine message within the word translation. I gave one example, like ecclesia, meaning assembly or congregation. So I would go to the Geneva Bible in terms of the biblical authenticity. The real teachings of Christ, who knows? I mean, it has been 2,000 years. And, the game of gossip, I don't know if you know that, but when kids sit in a circle and they start with one sentence, and they whisper it into the ear of the person next to them, and then goes around the circle. By the time it reaches the end, it's been totally changed from what the original thing was. That's what teaching is. Every time it's taught by someone to someone else, it changes a bit, it gets reinterpreted. So there's no such thing as a real teaching of Christ, as my indigenous relatives always tell me. Truth has many manifestations, and it evolves, it changes like the universe. That's the nature of the universe, change and conflict. And so we can't get into rigid models. Okay, this is the truth. That's what causes war and genocide when you think like that.
All right, so next question. How many cults run the world right now?
You tell me. I don't know. It depends. if you mean by a cult, this kind of our popular notion of a cult is some weirdos with guns held up on a house and some kind of survivalist mode. But cultism, for example, belief in the leadership principle, like a Hitler or a Stalin or a Pope, right? That's one of the attributes of a cult. You cannot diverge from the teachings of the great leader. And if we have the right to kill you if you do. And in that sense, you could call any corporation a cult. You could call any government in the world. I mean, in reality, they're operating according to that. So it depends how you define the word. It's like anything, right?
Question from Missy. Do you believe the words, when two are gathered in his name, is a worship of Jesus and Christian God?
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be one of the more authentic sayings of Christ from the early years, that he said that. Makes sense. I mean, it's been my experience that truth is more readily seen in a group of 2 or 3 or 4 than it is in a church. There's an old saying from Scotland, and it's truth gets lost in a crowd, so does God. And I think that that's very accurate, because when you know truth for yourself, but as soon as you have to communicate it or live it, like on a Sunday worship service, and I know I've had a lot of experience of this, it gets lost in the crowd energy, which is, we want to be happy and don't rock the boat and keep the money coming in, and you're serving the organization, not truth, and truth we find for ourselves. And so, yeah, that's where I come down on that question.
Kenneth wants to know, what's Kevin's opinion of Carney, a force for good or another dark-natured entity?
Do you mean the new prime minister, the new crime minister of Canada? Yeah. Well, again, he's not the head of state. The governor general is answerable directly to Charlie Boy in London. So he's quite irrelevant. You're part of a dark corporation. Then, or let's say there's a dragon comes into the room. It's pointless asking about the individual cells or scales on that dragon. You have to look at the beast as a whole, and this is what we're always trying to do. And you notice most of these questions are all about very kind of looking at individual scales of the dragon and not stepping back and saying, what are we dealing with? How do we stop it? Because it's killing children as we speak, right? And that's a life and death matter. And that's what I think people should be addressing, right?
So the previous guest we had on, when I talked about, the systematic, horrific things that happen to kids, how embedded it is in all of the structures, from in the intelligence agency, honey trap operations, to the church, and she said the public have got to come out and protest, and more awareness has got to be raised. What do you think? Because it just seems like we're banging our heads against monolithic structures.
Yep. That's why, out of our work about genocide and the crimes of the church, it led naturally to this, the Republic of Canada. And what that really is people taking back self-governance. That's, the theme of that book, my latest book, how we take back governance personally, politically, spiritually, sovereignty, right? And you don't rely on the existing structures at all. You create your own. So, for example, to give you a practical example, all across Canada, when all this truth came out over the last 25 years about proving the genocide by the churches and the government, on their own, grassroots Native communities began just walking into mostly Catholic churches, because they ran most of these death camps in Canada, and the Native children, and just telling the priest to get out. We have the right under law to seize church property now as reparations for all the crimes of genocide over the centuries. These churches, including especially the Catholic Church, have been criminally convicted of genocide and crimes against humanity. Therefore, under law, they don't have the right to their assets and property anymore. Their top officers and clergy can be arrested because they're involved in an ongoing criminal conspiracy to protect child rapists, like I mentioned before, in the Vatican policy, crimen. So don't wait. I've been at these church reclamations. It's great. They just go in, they take over the church building, they open it up as a daycare. When the Mounties show up, we go talk to them, say, this is totally lawful what they're doing. If you protect these churches, you're aiding and abetting criminal bodies that traffic children. The police say, always back off. We've never been arrested, never confronted. In fact, I then say to the cop, look, swear your oath of allegiance to the people in the Republic, not to King Charles in London, right? And some of them have joined. This is the exciting thing when you're doing something on the ground that's new. You're not waiting for the politicians. You're not waiting. It's so discouraging, and it's meant to be discouraging for you. It's meant to drain you of your hope and energy. Vampirism, like I said. Take it back in every way, but first here, right?
But when you get momentum of anything like that, don't they just send the Stasi in? Like here in the UK, we've got Stasi Starmer arresting 30 people a day for Facebook posts under the Online Safety Act. Now, if you cause anxiety in a Facebook post and someone complains, you go to prison.
I know. It happened to my friend Owen Lucas in Wales. 6 weeks in prison because he posted something they didn't like on Facebook. No charges, nothing. So don't forget, they take individuals and target them to scare people. See, look what we're going to do to you, right? That's why the church spent $250,000 tossing me out in a public defrocking trial, right? But here's the thing. You're like the mammals in the time of the dinosaurs before the meteor hits. We're just living inconspicuously underground. And they survived. The dinosaurs didn't. That's the situation we're in. We got to survive. We got to create our own network, Sean, right off the internet, based on the land, hopefully. Get the kids out of the cities, get them back into right relationships. That's where our power lies. And that's harder for them to penetrate, right? In the city, it's a problem because it's so controlled. But that's why people got to get out of these cities, especially before 2030. And so, in a practical sense, the more people who do that, the less power they have. They can't stamp out 1,000 brush fires. And so, that's been our experience. I'm still walking around. So are a lot of people who are working in this common law republic that's now all over the world. It's in 9 countries where we're doing this, right? Including England.
Yeah, but you're only just walking around. As many of my viewers know, you've had multiple attempts on your life.
Yeah, well, that's true. But that's a sign of weakness. If your enemy has to try to kill you, they're admitting they're powerless, right? Don't forget. And I've never been sued once in 30 years. That means they don't want this on the public record. They just want to isolate, discredit. They don't want to create a martyr, usually, by killing people. That'd be stupid. That'd bring more attention on me, and they know that. Right. So they just want to do the whispering campaign. Kevin Annett, he's crazy. All that stuff that you see. But so what? It's just words.
So PN wants to know, how much info did they hide in the Library of Alexandria?
Well, again, rumor. There was references that there was stuff in the Library of Alexandria referring to Atlantis. It depends who you read. We can't know. It was a disaster. It had, there was a movie made on that with Rachel Weisz. Do you remember? She was, anyway, it was about the Library of Alexandria. Hypatia, she was a scholar who was massacred by Christians because they didn't think a woman should be a scholar. I forget what it's called, but it's got Rachel Weisz in it. Tells you about the destruction of the Library of Alexandria.
Kevin, do you read Gary Wayne's books?
No, I don't think I know who that is.
PN, could there be a class of raptor humanoids living underground now?
Maybe there are. I don't know. It's like, what are chemtrails? Like, who knows? But what I do know is you don't have to be a reptile to be a beast. You're like, whether you're talking the royal family, whatever, that's our dark side of us. Any of us are capable of doing anything, and history proves that. So the whole thing about reptilian stuff, I think it's a big distraction. I think it's a way to shift responsibility onto the poor reptiles. I don't have anything against a reptile. I used to have a toad pet, right? Like, Oh no, that's not a reptile. That's an amphibian, isn't it? But you know what I mean. Like, just take responsibility, people. Human beings can be light or darkness. It's not just reptiles.
Speaking of chemtrails, have you seen the UK government under Stasi Starmer spending £50 million on putting up chemtrails to dim the sun to combat global warming?
Yeah, you're mentioning that. Well, don't forget, like, we're in a time of mass hysteria and insanity, and the further you go up, look at history, the further you go up into the hierarchy of society, the crazier people become, because you have to be dissociated to operate power like that over people, and you have to surrender your humanity and all that. And so Barbara Tuchman, a historian, wrote some good books about how societies that are in decline, they're making decisions that are increasingly self-destructive and suicidal because they have the secret death wish, right? They want things to end, but they can't because they're stuck into the system of power. So they make decisions that are going to destroy themselves quickly. And I see that's happening all around us now. So we need to step back and not get drawn into the madness and just keep your sovereignty, which is, again, why I wrote that book.
Do you believe in the rapture is the next one?
I've never experienced rapture myself. I know about the what it signifies, that the elect, the chosen, the saved are raptured directly up to heaven. Again, where that came from, it's church doctrine, and I'm always suspect of that. What did that indicate? I mean, you got to look at the time, the historical period in which it was written, and who it serves. But no, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know.
Just looking at this image here that I've been asked to ask you about. Let me just see if I can get it on the screen. It is about it's an image in the Vatican. Right, there we go. Show this one. Put on the screen. All right. So,
yeah.
What does the inside of the Vatican? Why does the inside of the Vatican depict a serpent? And there's a statue of Jesus surrounded by demons.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's different rationales of that. The official church doctrine would be that's Christ going down to hell for 3 days and cleansing hell. But that's funny, though, because my ancestor, Peter Annett, who was put in the stocks in London in the 1700s because he criticized church doctrine, he once asked the question, he said, and this is what got thrown him in prison for writing this. He asked, how could Christ have gone to hell for 3 days between his death and resurrection when it happened on a Friday and he was resurrected on a Sunday? That's 2 days, not 3. So it seems that these church people don't know mathematics or logic very well because they're claiming 3 days, in fact, when it was 2. And so the point is, this stuff isn't meant to be rational. It's meant to appeal to emotion because they know, like Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf, people don't think, they feel. He said, how fortunate for rulers that the people do not think. And it's not condescending, it's a fact. We're not trained to use this. We're trained to, we just operate primarily out of fear and longing and, all these other things. So what does that represent? It represents fear. And unless you believe in our interpretation of Christ, all those demons are going to get you. And that never really changes. And it's surprising. It's too bad the human race hasn't matured enough to see through these things, right?
All right, next question. Yeah, people are always being deceived. Okay, so all right, here we go. Do you think Jesus's brother James had more truth than Paul?
Well, James represented the early, what they call Jewish Christian church before Paul came along with Gentile Christianity. And I think James, reading his stuff, is closer historically to the period around Jesus. Paul, don't forget, wrote after Jesus had died and that. So, it represented kind of the revision of the Christian teachings Paul did, Pauline Christianity, that the church bases everything on. You see, don't forget, the Church of Rome especially bases everything on the book of John, which is the book gospel most distant in time from Jesus. Whereas Mark, the original gospel, close in time. How does it depict Jesus? Not as the Son of God. He's this fellow wandering around talking about the kingdom of God. not about I am the truth, the way, and the life. He says, no, we're to live in the kingdom of heaven. He's talking about this other world, or the world we can create here on earth inspired by that spirit, right? So, yeah, that period in early Christianity around James is more accurate in terms of the actual teachings of Jesus. And so again, you got to know the context of all these things, right?
So next question, why is it that the church depicts Jesus on the worst day of his life? Is it a mockery?
No, well, that's one interpretation. I don't know. If you're a diehard Orthodox Christian, you believe, no, it wasn't the worst day of his life. It was his best, because his death elevated everyone and created a way to heaven for us. So I mean, why do they call it Good Friday when he was crucified? If that's what you're referring to? I don't know. If you want to get caught up in all this theology talk, fine, but I don't think it ever leads anywhere, right?
Missy, do you believe in the scriptures and that Satan and the demons are here on earth? Or the one we call Satan, Beelzebub, is being cast down upon you to mislead the entire inhabited earth? It seems like Beelzebub is in the Vatican to me, Missy.
Yeah, well, it's not accidental that John Knox and all the early Protestant reformers, they all referred to the Church of Rome as the synagogue of Satan, because it was setting itself up as the opposite of Christ, right? Vicari Christi, the title of the Pope, the one who replaces Christ. I mean, what does it tell you? It's right there in front of you. So why do you think it causes all these crimes all over the world? But you don't have to believe in Satan or Beelzebub to find evil. Just look in the mirror. I mean, we all have that capacity. And we got to start, you see, a child will always project on, everything onto other people. Don't know how to take responsibility. When people talk about religion and that and the devil, we're not taking responsibility for who we are. And it's time we did that, right? So, I don't know.
Amy, in the Bohemian Grove ritual, the cremation of Kerr, do you believe they have used real humans or animals?
That's what I hear. It's hearsay. Who knows?
Okay. Have you heard of Eamon Hillman, a PhD in Greek classics, who says Jesus was a child transporter?
No, I haven't. And I find these questions getting increasingly ridiculous, to be honest.
Okay, let me try and I'll filter. Any chance of a sequel to Unrepentant?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we're working on it. It's one of the projects I'm working on right now. And Unrepentant ended in 2007, before the pseudo-apology, before this stuff spread all over the world, before we forced Ratzinger's resignation. So there's a lot to not only document, but use it as a springboard to what people are realizing more and more, that we need to take back the whole ball of wax. And, the knowledge of these crimes they've committed can't be an end in itself. Oh yeah, we've learned something new. It has to be a springboard to action. And this is kind of the focus of the documentary. So again, I think you've got my email. If you want to participate or learn more about that, just write me.
All right, we're getting near the hour, folks. Get your final questions in for Kevin now, please. And keep them serious questions within, what he's talking about. Sky Spirit, do you believe in the literal interpretation of the hierarchies of angels?
No.
All right. Candice, is the Republic of Canada a Ottawa, Ontario regional thing?
No, Canada was formed at a convention in Winnipeg, January 15th, 2015. And it exists across the country. In effect, what it's done, because the authority of the Crown of England was nullified by the criminal conviction of Elizabeth in at the same trial that forced Ratzinger out of office, Canada has no head of state under international law. We replaced that with a new jurisdiction based on the will of the people, like in America or any sovereign republic. And it exists across the country, and it's functioning. We have, in a number of places, our own assemblies and courts. We've never been shut down by the police. In fact, like I say, some of the police have already joined our ranks. Nullify your oath of allegiance to the monarch in London and take it to a Republican constitution, which you can find at republicofcanada.org, and get on board.
All right, we're at the hour. It's always a huge pleasure, my friend. It always goes so fast, and we learn so much. Is there anything you would like to say in conclusion to the viewers?
Well, like I say, as we started, when Perilin gets into power, whether or not he's wearing the papal hat or not, he's the power, as is the link to China. So what that means on the ground in a place like Canada is a lot of bad things, because the situation is getting extremely bad. And I'm sorry we didn't have the chance to go into this, like these real things happening on the ground. But people are disappearing at an even a lot more alarming rate. Whole native families going missing because China and Canada are working together to clear out the whole northern area in Alberta and British Columbia to get the liquid natural gas and the oil for China. So we're documenting. When the person mentioned the sequel to Unrepentant, that's one of the things we're documenting, how these crimes are happening now as we speak. And the genocidal Church of Rome is the financial underwriter for this stuff. So we got to, that's another reason why we need to shut down this oldest criminal body on the planet.
All right. Huge thank you for coming on as usual. I'm sure there's going to be lots more developments in the Vatican. And you have a great rest of your day, my friend. Take care.
Thanks. Thanks to everybody. All
right. Cheers. Thanks, Kevin. Bye. All right. What a phenomenal guest. Thank you for all of your questions. And we've done hours and hours of streaming this evening. Time for us to get some rest. And we will be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. I've got the author of the book on Christian Bruckner on the McCann case. The Channel 4 documentary's just gone out. I'm going to have to watch that before I go to bed. And then Ron's got Gilbert King, Bone Alley coming on. And he's also got an active officer exposing US police corruption. And then Saturday, Hamamoto. And we've also got Epstein's niece and Chris Todd on the McCann case and Christian Bruckner. So lots of fun stuff lined up. Yeah, we have reached out to Burnt. Would love to get his perspective. Have any of you in the chat watched the Channel 4 thing that came out? Yeah, 9 a.m. tomorrow, Rosa. With it's going to be an early one. I'm going to have to get on that before I even have breakfast. So thanks for tuning in, folks. And we will see some of you on tomorrow's streams, no doubt. And hope you got to catch the T-Bone podcast. 3 hours long. If you missed it, when this one ends, it should take you over to it. And he was a guy I met in prison, a US Marine, who was using his fighting skills to stop prison rape. And the rapists were fighting back. He almost got killed a few times. Incredible.